And his actions created one of the most polarized countries that we have ever seen and made our systems in America seem like even more of a joke than they have been.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. I understand where you're coming from. I really do. I will say this. Donald Trump's presidency was extremely polarizing.
Will not be a great president.
Yeah, I would say that I think Trump is going to be a pretty bad president. I think there are multiple ways to gauge what makes a good president. I think one, you could say advancing U.S. interests. I don't think he'll do that very effectively. And then two, you could say respecting, general ethical, moral principles that we think lead to a better world. And I also don't think Trump will do a good job in that. So I'd be interested to hear kind of what you think makes a great president and where you think Trump is going to excel. Maybe in every.
What's going on, everybody, man? My name is LFR JoJo. I'm a graduate student studying electronics engineering, and today we'll be checking out a student who challenges the fact that, or the debate on whether or not Trump will be a good or bad president versus a conservative pundit, I believe. He goes around and he usually debates college students. I'm very interested to know what they think about this because this is not really I hope that Donald Trump's a great president. I don't know enough about what he wants to do to confidently say I fully believe he will be. Not saying he won't be, but I'm just trying to learn more as we go. But anyways, let's not waste any more time. Let's go.
Everything, maybe you want to focus on something in particular?
Yeah, I mean, we can just start by talking about general things that I think benefit Americans. So
okay, so you want to focus first on America.
Sure, you talk about American interests, so we can talk about that.
Yeah, which is fine. Yeah.
I think that a lot of this we can extrapolate from his first presidency and kind of guess that his next presidency will be pretty similar to his last presidency. Same issues will probably be prominent within his second presidency. He'll probably take a similar approach to a lot of issues. So during his first presidency, he created 9,000 economic opportunity zones, which incentivized large investments into low-income neighborhoods, primarily affecting low-income people and minorities. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I think, was great. He doubled the standard deduction. He also doubled the child tax credit. People making $15,000 to $50,000 a year received an average tax break of 16 to 26%. That's almost a quarter of their total tax burden. People $50,000 to $100,000 a year received a tax break of 15 to 17%. And then people making over $1 million a year still received a tax break, but it was significantly less than 6%. So he did a great job of sort of balancing the interests of corporations and the interests of individuals. I think you need both. Corporations can't survive without individuals, and individuals can't survive without corporations. I think that he was even good on stuff like the Environment, Save Our Seas Act. There was multiple rounds of that, cleaning up garbage and other debris in marine areas so that wildlife could survive better. Defeat of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, the Abraham Accords. He repealed individual mandate, which effectively fined poor people for not having insurance. $6 billion to fight the opiate epidemic, 400,000 manufacturing jobs in his first 2 years. I think that he was a pretty good president. I think his COVID response was also great.
Okay, great. Well, I'll talk about why, maybe in general, why I think he's going to fail as a president and why I think he didn't do an amazing job. And then we can go into the specific points that you brought up because there's a lot to discuss here. So, I mean,
for you, by the way, if you want to take notes.
Yeah, no, it's all fine. All right, so let's start with where I think Trump really failed. I think Trump really failed on the global climate response. I think both looking at America's interests and global interests, America needs to be playing a global role in fighting against climate change. I think Trump, a lot of those job creation activities and programs that Trump supported were fracking related to non-green, non-renewable energy, which are not sustainable in the long term. Additionally, he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, which I think is disastrous, and I'm sure you have many things to say about that. But it is essential that America takes a global stance fighting for a greener future, because America.
I love the fact that he's bringing up taking a global stance, fighting for a greener future, because I hear a lot of young people especially say this, but when you watch how they live, it's the opposite. For example, we all have the new and I'm going to talk about myself. I'm not even going to talk about him. We all have a new iPhone. I have a dual monitor setup. I have a very, very nice camera with the lights on, the shining on the wall. I use my HVAC system religiously. I turn the heat on and the AC on whenever I feel like it. The only way stuff like that is able to exist is, ironically, because we don't have a green present. All I'm trying to say is petroleum and gas and electricity and all those power sources only exist because of the antithesis of what he's saying. if we were to give in to what he's saying, we can, but just be ready for the quality of your life to decrease dramatically. And I don't think a lot of young people want that to happen. What I think it is, I think a lot of young people want it to be a green future, but I don't think they want to sacrifice the comforts of their own life. They don't want to sacrifice being able to buy clothes whenever they want, which actually take energy to create. They don't want to sacrifice being able to have AC and heat whenever they want, which take obviously gas-powered systems to have, or have stoves in your house. They don't want to sacrifice that. They want someone else to sacrifice it. That's just my perspective so far, but let's continue.
It is a global player, and obviously we're not the only one, but Trump did a terrible job at that overall. Next, let's move onto the COVID response. Now, once again, this is something that you brought up as something Trump did well. This is absolutely not the case. Trump definitively responded to COVID in a flawed way. His response was slow. It was not good enough to stop COVID from ravaging America. And honestly, the economic damage that was done to America was significantly greater than it would have been if we saw actual widespread, vaccines being supported across the country. And they were to some extent, but Trump and his cabinet, people pushed against the narrative that vaccines are the solution to COVID. They often pushed against the narrative that we need to worry about it until it was far too late. So I think there's a lot to get into there, and it's a very complex subject, but I think overall, Trump failed. And then third, and there's a lot more that I could bring up about Trump, but I think Trump fundamentally undermined American democracy. In his actions, he created one of the most polarized countries that we have ever seen, and made our systems in America seem like even more of a joke than they have been for the past.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there. I understand where you're coming from. I really do. I will say this. Donald Trump's presidency was extremely polarizing. His presidency was extremely polarizing. Sides split like the Red Sea. They split down the middle. You're either left or you're right. And if you're in the center, you're right. But that's the problem. When he was president, when you were in the center, they considered you right. What does that mean? That means people who are naturally trying to stay centered down the middle are considered conservative Republicans. And that was me. I remember a year ago, or about a year and a half ago, I did a test. It's on my YouTube channel. I did a test that tests am I left leaning or right leaning. I did it on YouTube, and I'm pretty centered. And think about it, a year and a half ago, I didn't even know a lot about politics. I'm an engineering student. I really didn't. I did the test. I answered it fair, and they considered me a super right-wing conservative Republican. I'm like, what? That's what that test said. That showed that leftists were the ones isolating people. Leftists were the ones pushing people on the other side. That's what actually happened. So I get what he's trying to say. His presidency was extremely polarizing. But trying to say that it's purely because of Donald Trump, I don't think that's a fair stance. Even in this past 4 years, when you talk about making America look like a joke, the people who were doing things that were actively anti-American or anti-worker, that wasn't Trump. That was the left side. And I think that's just a fair statement. That's why the left lost this election. They lost because they were deemed as the party who were doing things that were anti-American. I'm not saying that's actually true. I think the Democratic side did good things. I really do think they did good things. But I do think they could have communicated what they've done better, but they were the party who were deemed as anti-American, giving money away, so on and so forth, however you want to flip it. That's why Donald Trump was able to win. But I don't know too much about, all the intricacies and the laws, whatever. So I'm going to hear this out even more.
Past few decades, well, specifically since 9/11. And I think all of those have created the framework for Trump to fail once again as a president.
Yeah, so here's what I'm going to say. So as far as COVID response, you said it was flawed and slow. That's not true. He early and proactively closed our borders to China and prevented immigration here that could have spread the disease. You said that he pushed back on vaccines and his cabinet didn't support vaccines. You can actually thank Trump for the vaccine because thanks to Operation Warp Speed, a program that he put in place, the vaccine was produced underneath his administration. It was actually Joe Biden and Kamala Harris during that time that was pushing back on the vaccines. Kamala Harris very famously remarked that she wouldn't be taking a vaccine if Trump told her to take a vaccine.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
That she would rather defer to experts, which obviously worked underneath Trump. So like Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx were employed by Donald Trump. They were the highest paid members of the federal government, and they worked underneath Donald Trump. So if Trump tells them to take the vaccine, they're not going to take it, but they'll take it if the experts tell them to take it, right? Those people work under Trump. So she was fundamentally undermining the vaccine that Trump produced. One sec, I'm not finished. I'll let you talk as long as you wanted to. Okay, so I'm going to continue. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Trump distributed 5 million boxes of food to farmers and families affected by the virus. On top of that, he signed the Family's First Coronavirus Response Act. He signed $2.2 trillion in COVID stimulus packages, particularly related to the CARES Act. He rolled out rapid tests. He established federally funded testing sites across the United States. He mobilized the Army Engineer Corps to build hospitals across the United States. He mobilized hospital ships to go to particularly affected areas like New York City. He encouraged hazard pay for private corporations. He allocated funds to alleviate supply chain issues, particularly in agriculture. On top of that, you said that the COVID-19 pandemic was particularly devastating under Trump, but why is it that 847,000 people died under Joe Biden and only 372,000 died under Donald Trump?
All right. First of all, I want to say that this is a very common thing that I see Republicans do, is that they immediately frame any debate about Trump as Trump versus Biden, Trump versus Harris, about this comparison. And I'm not here espousing Biden or like advocating for Biden whatsoever. So I'm not even going to take that route because I think that's a false dichotomy. I can critique Trump and also be someone who would critique Biden. Now, let's get into the specific points that you were focusing on. First of all of the things that you mentioned, or at least the majority of them, you act as though like Dr. Fauci is someone who Trump is like responsible for all of the actions of. And I agree that you can't necessarily, it's very difficult.
He was responsible for establishing the White House task force on COVID-19, which is where Deborah Birx and Fauci worked.
Both of these young men seem extremely intelligent, I'll say that, and they actually know a lot more about this topic than I know. So that's why I'm not really saying too much, because I honestly don't know. I don't know about what happened during the pandemic and how Trump, handled it. I don't know at all. Let me know what you guys think, though.
Yeah, I mean, that, as the president would. And Donald Trump did not and I guess it's very hard to separate the president from the country because the country is a broad, interlaid, system of different forces moving. Like, for example, does Donald Trump get credit for any bill that he signs into law? Does he take repercussions for any bill that he signs into law? When oftentimes Republicans are actually pushing for less stimulus to actually go to these families. And yes, of course, Donald Trump signed them in the end, but a stimulus package was widely a bipartisan issue and something that, except for with specific Republicans that were supporting certain, or had issues with certain aspects of it, I don't think Trump gets credit for America simply giving out stimulus to families and to people. And now the actual death toll count of Biden versus Trump, I'm not exactly aware of. I assume that it's largely because simply when the spike of coronavirus kind of hit, coronavirus as the pandemic does, kind of has a peak, and it goes back down as vaccines roll out and as people effectively quarantine away the virus. Not very well informed on that, but I would assume that's the best explanation. I think
an explanation, and I don't know a lot about the deaths, and rest in peace to everyone who did pass away from the pandemic. I would just say, yeah, I was a senior in high school when the COVID-19 hit, and that was Donald Trump's last year in office, I believe, 2020. So maybe it has to do with the timing of the virus. That was March of 2020. Yeah, I think it just had to do with the timing. But then again, I don't know. It could be the timing. It could not be the timing.
Any radical policy shifts or specific things that Biden did in order to increase the deaths of the coronavirus? And I'd be interested if you have an idea.
Sure. So I want to start with some of the early things you said, or things you said a minute ago. So you said that just because Trump signed something doesn't mean he necessarily gets credit for it. The president's job is to work with Congress and push bills through Congress and get them signed. The president has a choice with all bills that go through Congress to either support them or work against them actively, right? Depending on what he thinks is right and wrong. Trump actively worked to push these bills through Congress. He actively worked to get Republicans on board with them. And you're right that there were some Republicans who pushed back against stimulus, which I think makes it extra important that Trump supported them and signed the bill and gave stimulus and routinely supported the stimulus plans before they were passed and then got them passed and delivered to the American people. 2 rounds. The CARES Act, particularly, was $2.2 trillion, which is a massive amount of money. No American who needed one went without a ventilator. Every American who needed a ventilator had one because of Donald Trump. Your position that Trump doesn't necessarily get credit for bills that he signs, your initial statement was that Donald Trump did not act fast enough. And I think that all Trump did was act fast enough. Again, closing the borders early and proactively to China, for which he was called racist and xenophobic. Also, Operation Warp Speed, that was pretty early on, produced the vaccine. You wouldn't have had a vaccine without it, at least not as quickly. And he also worked with the FDA to get those things approved and expedite the approval process for those vaccines.
Great. Yeah, so I think it's really important here that we look at the actual characterization of what influence a president has on what's occurring. Like, I think that, you know, the U.S. overall, you know, as the government did, the vaccine was relatively quick, and closing the border to China was relatively quick, but I think Trump was actually pretty delayed in closing the border to other countries that actually had coronavirus in an extended period of time, specifically because, you know, there is this kind of racial idea of what borders are okay to close. If you're going to close borders to, you know, China, you're going to close borders to Muslim countries, that's okay, and then European countries, or, you know, allies, quote unquote, would be something that Trump is less likely to move on. I do
think this was a very productive conversation. I think both of them know a pretty good amount, although on opposing sides. Let me know who you guys agree with the most. I would say the one in the coat, the blue coat with the pen, he seems a little more prepared for this, but as he should be. This is his video. He's probably researched more. He has notes. The other young man doesn't have notes, but he seems like he knows a pretty good amount about this. However, I'm going to end this video here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. It's LFR JoJo, and I'll see you on the next one.